All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the February NCAM webinar. I'm joined now by Scott Gansky, who is YSA's Director of Education. And I'm also joined by Charles Orgbon III, who is the CEO of Greening Forward, and he will be leading most of this webinar. But first, we're just going to hear from Scott about a really cool new resource that YSA has. So Scott, do you want to go ahead?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So I was able to meet some of you at the training in September, and one of the things that I'm excited to share with you today is about a new curriculum that we just launched last week at YSA called Classrooms with a Cause. The reason that I'm introducing it today is because I think that it's a great opportunity for some of you, most of you probably, who have specific issues that you'd like to see maybe working with some of the classroom teachers. My background is as the classroom teacher, 8 years in the classroom, and now working with teachers who are facilitating meaningful service learning projects in the classroom. And really the point here was to develop something that's really easy for teachers to understand and to implement in the classroom. So if you could go to the next slide, please.
Sure.
So what is Classrooms with a Cause? It's really a 4 to 6 week framework. It really helps students apply knowledge of what they've learned during the year. But it also gives basically the teachers and the students an opportunity. It says here the final weeks of the school year, but also the final weeks leading up into a GYSD project. And then, of course, it provides students an opportunity to really apply what they've learned and to integrate 21st century skills. We work a lot with administrators, teachers, parents, community partners, and one of the things is just to be able to provide a simple framework. What you have right in front of you right now is a couple of sample pages we're going to go through of the facilitator guide, and essentially what that does is it's the same facilitator guide. It lines up specifically with each of the student versions. So one of the things that does not exist in service learning until now is really a teacher's edition and a student edition, which is what you'll have with this Classrooms with a Cause curriculum. Next page, please. The great thing about this is that the person that's facilitating, you can either do it as an individual project, so someone can just use the student edition. You can do it in small groups or pairs, or as an entire class. Next page. You'll also see here that for teachers, for example, we're going to go through a little bit here in a second. We're going to give you an example. We know quite a few of you are doing projects that relate to bullying prevention. So right here you'll see a sample timeline of the 5 weeks that shows really a breakdown of the activity, specific ideas of what they can use, and also the student guide pages that it relates to. The teachers that we work with and just teachers across the country, one of the biggest things that can be a challenge for them is really assessing a meaningful service project. And so what we have is a variety of different activities and rubrics that the teachers that, if you'd like to get it into a classroom, can use throughout the entire process. Next page, please. So here's an example, and this is where I just really want to relate to what your, the projects. I've looked at all of your examples. I've met most of you, but right here, there's a student version. So as you can see, this is the facilitator guide, and it shows you the first page of the student versions of Classrooms with a Cause. And there's a section essentially where it says, here's student page 1, and here's your sample script of how you can work with your students. But what's great is the student version is in Microsoft Word. So what you can do is you can actually take a prompt and you can put that in there instead of what we currently have. So if you're doing a project on bully prevention, if you go to the next slide here, you can actually pull. So right here, you'll see this, there's sample prompts that are inside of the facilitator guide, and you could pull one. So right there, there's bully prevention, and there's an example of how they use statistics. What's important about this is that a lot of teachers, as you look at Common Core standards, are using project-based learning. So we utilized that in order to come up with something that teachers that maybe if you wanted it into a classroom could easily pull. So you could pull one of these, and if you go to the next slide here. So as you can see, that's the first page on the left side of the student edition that's in Word. You could actually take that little think about section, and you could put in a prompt, in this case, a bullying prevention prompt. Now, obviously, we've got Matthew Kaplan over in Arizona. He could have a prompt that is specifically related to his particular program, and he could actually be putting in statistics that relate to Arizona or something that's specific about his program. And if you go to the next page, what's nice is once you have that problem, we're using specific pages from Semester of Service, which is our most popular research-based service learning program. We're using pages that we know research shows that provide a structure for a teacher to use in the classroom. And if you go to the next page, you'll also see that it has a process that allows students, if they wanted to take on their own unique approach to a specific issue area that you're focusing on, they can decide, is it a specific project that they want to do. The purpose of this is really for you as a youth leader and in the project and as an ambassador to really build your project to scale within a school. And we work closely with teachers and administrators, so what we've developed is something that we know will work in the classroom and that integrates into career and workforce readiness skills, Common Core, and the types of trends and things that are really important in schools today. You go to the next page. So really, here are your next steps. Obviously, right now, I briefly talked about this because I want to make sure we have enough room for the amazing Charles, because he is unbelievable, and it would be great for you guys to hear about what he's doing. But some of the next steps would really be to, if you're interested in this, is to register to receive the curriculum. And that's only if you plan to use it. If that's something you'd like to see built to scale within an after-school program or during school or with mentors and mentees, just go to www.ysa.org/classrooms. Step number 2 is going to be to modify the student page so that it aligns with your project. So as I showed in that example of bullying prevention, you can actually go through and put in a prompt. You could copy one of those ones, or you could actually take it. My suggestion would be to take it and really make sure it aligns with your specific project. Step 3 is to maybe identify a teacher or a facilitator that you want to partner with. It could be multiple. Step 4 would be to meet with that teacher or facilitator, show them the curriculum, and really talk about how it could be embedded into their current teaching and what they're doing. And then 5, just let me know, if you do have some additional teachers that are working on it. It's great for tracking purposes. And finally, number 6, just feel free to email me at sgansky@ysa.org if you have any questions. Maybe you have a question about the curriculum. Maybe you have a question about different ways of working with teachers and you're looking for some tips and tricks. But as always, we're always there to support you. And that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. For those of you who aren't really sure if this is going to apply to your project or not sure you want to use it, that's totally fine. Feel free to just go over what Scott just said, check it out. But if you are interested, I think it's a really great resource. And Scott obviously is here to answer any questions you have through his email, or if you want to just email me directly, that's totally fine as well. So thank you, Scott.
Thanks.
And now I'm going to pass it over to Charles, who should be unmuted now. Charles, are you there?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity. I started Greening Forward in response to my school's littering problem. I actually had to do service as a service project, and that forced me to look at the world and my role within it a little bit differently. So I began paying closer attention to my world around me, and I noticed that folks were littering. It didn't make much sense to me. So that was when I started staying after school to pick up litter and then bringing in other students as well and bringing more attention to the issue. And littering became my first outlet to realizing, wow, there's so much more environmental damage and environmental issues out there. what can I do and how can I help support other young change makers around the issue of the environment. If you click the next slide, we can try to play this video. If not, if that doesn't work, then we can move on. I don't think folks can hear the audio. But this was the bio reel that was also sent to folks that was in the description of the webinar. So Greening Forward became the organization and my outlet to helping to share my message and bring a collective voice of support and networking and resources and capacity building for other young environmental change makers. And the next slide, thank you. And now we're working with 50 youth groups who have identified issues such as estuary monitoring in low country South Carolina, composting in rain gardens in Buffalo, anti-fracking and bike-friendly communities in Aurora, Denver, Boulder, Colorado. And we're becoming a movement of young people who are taking action against environmental issues in our communities. And I believe that this success came from our presence online and folks being able to connect with us and find these resources that Greening Forward offer, like our grants and our curriculum and our mentorships and our youth summit. In the age of access, I believe that young people know where to find information about our environmental crisis that our world is facing. And they're looking for answers as to how do they create change around that issue in their community. And so this is where Greening Forward is filling the void. This is where Greening Forward provides a youth solution to environmental issues. Because those young people who know that the polar ice caps are melting and who know that deforestation is an issue, what do they do about that? How do they create the future and drive the change that they wish to see? And Greening Forward is the organization that they can connect with that's powered by other young people just like this. So our Youth Summit brings together young people for more environmental leadership training. Our grants, we're giving away thousands of dollars to youth-driven organizations. We've developed a sharing community that provides an international platform to share ideas and good news with one another. And our mentorship. Our mentorship is connecting young people to other resources. And then we have over 120 curriculum resources that are guiding young people on how to write grants, engage their elected officials, and create sustainable campaigns, recruit, help, and lead their teams. These are 21st century skills that young environmentalists are going to need to create change in their communities. Our curriculum resources help young people develop their ideas. Oftentimes, young people see an issue, and they really want to jump to the next phase. But Greening Forward challenges young people to think about all of the people who are affected by the issue, who make decisions about the issue, and bringing those stakeholders together to create change. And that's one of this here. The slide here comes from one of our curriculum resources. It's called that we made into a comic strip. So we're sharing this information in a creative way too, that young people are able to digest and see how that applies to their own ideas as they try to turn their ideas into action. And I had a couple of tips for you on the next slide. And so I also decided to create this catchy line, produce something sexy. If for you, for your idea, your projects, what is the missing link in your community that your organizations could be, or your project could solve, or that you have the resources that you can help with. For me, I noticed that there was littering, and that was the issue that I wanted to solve in my community. And there was a little bit of encouragement there because I first, got a grade for it, but then it became something that I actually enjoyed doing and became, honestly, an expression of something that I thought that I was good at and that I was able to learn from and grow with and provide meaning to my life. But as you think about the community issues that are local to your community, I encourage you to think of solving an unmet need that is there. And then in order to find this work successful, I guess from my work with Reading Forward, I've noticed that we can't do this alone, that we're so much more powerful when we're able to call upon collective voices and collective interests to create a collective impact. And so I encourage folks to redefine what does partnership mean in creating uncommon collaboratives where folks are coming to the table around the issues that you care about, the businesses that are affected by it, the communities, the people, the policymakers, all around the issue that you care about and how they can support that and how they're affected by that. And then you're going to make mistakes, but I think that what's really helpful is if you can find 3 cheerleaders, 3 mentors, 3 champions who aren't going to tell you necessarily what you want to hear all the time, but who you can go to when you're dealing with issues that are going to arise. These are folks who you might have an issue with someone on your team. They're not filling their end of the bargain, or you might have an issue with how do you take your project to change it and create a strategic plan for it. Things that maybe you can't find around you, where can you find that in mentorships? Maybe I knew that my parents weren't environmentalists, but my mentors are. So there are different things that I'm going to ask of my mentors. So I encourage you that to find those 3 champions too to support you in your work, who can help fill those gaps where you haven't had experience and who can share with best practices with you from their own experience. So a little metaphor here, be a river and not a flood. What that means is a river is very much more defined. You know where the banks are, and it's usually very deep too. Whereas a flood kind of comes on you at once, and it creates damage and goes all across everywhere, and it's really shallow most of the time. So what this means is with your commitments, I see so many resumes because folks apply to Greening Forward and want to work with Greening Forward and on our youth council and on our staff, and I see a lot of young people who are flooded with all the things that they would like to do but just don't have the time in the world to do everything that they're passionate about. So I'm encouraging you to pick 1 or 2 things that you want to concentrate your time and your leadership on, and be very careful about the things that do require time of you and how is that adding to your own life ultimately. I'm currently in AP Economics, and I'm just discovering the economic term to this. It's called the opportunity cost. So thinking about how much are you going to have to give up of one thing to do another. So we can't take on the entire world. We can't be a flood. We're so much more effective when we can be a river. And one more metaphor, choose big rocks over little rocks. So kind of the same thing is, I like to apply here, I think another theme that goes hand in hand with this is Pareto's principle of 80%, 80-20 rule. So 20% of your time creates 80% of its impact, and the same kind of same principle can be applied to the things that you do. The top 20% of the time that you spend on volunteering or your initiatives really should create of your long-term goals need to correspond to 80% of the other. So what that means is the more energy you spend into that 20% in something that's smaller, the greater impact that should be having. Otherwise, it could be very inefficient. So that's helping you to think about how does your service and your leadership fall in line to all the other rocks in your life, like your family and academics and so forth, which I think was really helpful for me, those tips, running a national, international nonprofit organization, and how do I have to figure out time management and how does that work. Next slide. So I wanted to leave you with a couple of resources. So Greening Forward's how-to guides, like discussed before, these are the capacity building resources that we've developed. You can find them online. That same little insert from the comic strip is also available online as well. Free for you to download. There is opportunities to volunteer with Greening Forward. We also have our youth summit that's coming up in 2 weeks. Oh my goodness, it's not even 2 weeks. It is 9 days. So that's really exciting. If you're in the Atlanta area, that could be an opportunity for you. There's also some books that I found that's been very helpful in my leadership and service and environmental issues and understanding all of those things. And some of them are represented on this reading guide. Also collections of what books and things have been read by our staff and other Greening Forward organization members are compiled there as our way of sharing kind of the things that have made an impact on us and how we see the world and have grown as leaders, and just kind of sharing what we've learned with other folks who may be interested and don't know where to start. So that link is also available for you guys. And so finally, I have one really nice quote that I want to leave with you. I actually like a lot of what Henry David Thoreau has said that's quotable. But if you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. So being invited to be a part of this webinar, I knew that I was going to be able to speak to really amazing young change makers out there who already have, you guys already have an idea on kind of what that need is that you're solving in your community. But I hope that maybe this message can give you inspiration, maybe some things to think about too as you continue your servant leadership to your communities. I started with nothing as well, no resources, no money, had to learn it all. I believe that it's very possible that still, despite that, any young person can create substantive change in their communities. There's one other thing that I didn't put up there, my advice to you. Being a senior makes me think a lot about, I guess, being a freshman. And when I started all of this I think many years ago, and that's how it seems now. But another quote that I like is, begin with the end in mind by Stephen Covey. And I also encourage you guys to think about that as well, so that you're not creating one-off projects, things that only happen once, and then after that the excitement and the energy dies. And so that's also part of Greening Forward's trainings and workshops, is how do we create sustaining change. So if folks have questions about that, or anything that I've said, or any kind of problems that you might be having, I would love to answer them. It sounds like you can write them in the chat box, and Sarah can voice them aloud.
Yep. Thank you so much, Charles. As Charles just said, guys, there's a questions box on your side panel of your GoToWebinar. So if you'd like to ask any questions, feel free to just type them in, and then I will read them out loud so everyone can hear them, and then Charles will tackle them. So we'll give you a minute or so, but feel free to type any questions that you want in that box. And also, just a side note, you'll see on the screen is Charles's contact information. So both his Twitter, Instagram for Greening Forward, as well as his email and the website. So if you have any questions that do come up after the webinar and you forgot to ask, or it just suddenly comes to you, his contact information is also up on the screen. So take note of that as well. So we have a question for Taylor, and she said, what are your plans moving forward after high school?
Well, that's a great question, especially given that I said begin with the end in mind and how that might be applying to me. Well, I know I'm not so certain where I'll be college-wise next year. Hopefully we'll find that out in the next month. But I do know that there's this great uncertainty about where my time is going to be and how much college is going to demand of me. So I'm thinking about kind of what is my role in Greening Forward and how that might change and evolve. But exciting news is that I still will be CEO of Greening Forward, but in September we're going to be hiring full-time staff, and that full-time staff person will do a lot of the day-to-day operations of Greening Forward that I used to do. My role will continue to serve in a more development, fundraising role, strategic visionary role, but no longer in recruitment and volunteer management and the ins and outs of like our youth summit in 9 days and all that kind of stuff. So that's what the full-time staff person will do, and that means that I'll be able to concentrate a little bit more on school, because it feels like Greening Forward is like a full-time job right now for me. So I'm really excited about that opportunity and that change that's coming up.
That's awesome. Taylor says thank you. Guys, are there any more questions? This is such a good time to ask Charles anything. He's in your position and he's your age. So if you have any questions, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them. So just type them in the box.
And Sarah, it might also be helpful if those links of the resources also go out. I think that reading guide list is really cool, full of really great content too. And that was my favorite one. If we had to choose one that you should all go to, is look at some of the books that are there.
Sure. Yeah, I will be sending them a follow-up email with the link to the recording of this, as well as all of those links in the video, as well as your introduction video. I'm sorry that didn't work. All right, guys, I'm going to give you another minute or so to type in your questions, because I don't want to keep anyone if no one has anything to ask. But again, this is a great opportunity to ask any questions, and I'm sure Charles is eagerly awaiting what you have to ask, so feel free. All right, well, I don't want to keep anyone just listening to the silence. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the Charles section of this webinar, and I have a few reminders to go over with you guys. But within the next couple of minutes, if you do have questions, just type them in, and we'll go back to it afterwards. But just a couple of reminders that GYSD is coming up very, very soon, sooner than we all think. So make sure that you're registering your GYSD project on the link that I have both emailed to you as well as put in the newsletter. That's really important that you do that so we can track the amount of projects that are happening around the country. Also, reading the newsletter is huge. That is the place where I send most of the information to you guys. So make sure that you're reading through that and letting me know if you have any questions or something comes up that you don't understand. But that's where I'm sending most of the information to you guys, most of the important information anyway. So make sure you're reading it and letting me know if you have any questions. And our next webinar will be March 27th. It's going to be a follow-up, sort of, to the January webinar. It will be GYSD focused and youth focused. So it will not only be NCAM, but there will be other attendees on that webinar. And Chris, who is here at YSA, is looking for a few young people, a few young change makers, project leaders, to help him with the webinar and help run the webinar. So we're looking for someone who knows what they're doing for GYSD and can kind of talk about that planning process and what it's been like to do that project. So if that's something you're interested in, we would love to have you join us. Obviously, all of you are required to be on the webinar, but if you're interested in presenting, feel free to just let me know, and I can connect you with Chris, who can give you some more details about that. But those are my only reminders. I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes, but so if you have more questions, feel free to type them in. If not, thank you so much for joining us. I know Charles was really excited to get your questions, so hopefully he'll get a bunch of follow-up emails from the webinar. And I hope that you all have a great evening.